The Bermuda Triangle, an ocean full of secrets.
Something which, even in this world of science, we cannot fully explain.
Ships disappear without trace.
There's a shipwreck there, there's a shipwreck there, there's another one right there. That's just kind of strange.
Airplanes mysteriously go missing. Stories of sea monsters and strange sightings.
When I entered the tunnel, these strange lines instantly formed.
The Bermuda Triangle. What's really going on there? The great myths of mankind. Mysteries passed on over thousands of years. Inexplicable events, places shrouded in legend and superhuman heroes. Even scientists are fascinated. Is there any truth to these ancient legends? Researchers across the globe are working hard to solve the greatest mysteries of our time. Bruce Gernon contributed a lot to the myth of the Bermuda Triangle. To this day, he cannot explain what happened to the US pilot almost 50 years ago.
On December 4th of 1970, my father and I were in Andros Island in the Bahamas. We were planning on leaving early in the morning to return to Palm Beach International Airport.
Bruce, who was 29 at the time, and his father often take this route. Perfect visibility, no wind. The two men don't have the slightest idea of what's to come.
When I lifted off, I looked at my wristwatch, and then I can remember the second hand actually struck 12, and it was exactly 3 o'clock.
In his Beechcraft Bonanza A36, Bruce takes off from Andros, the largest archipelago in the Bahamas, where he is headed northwest via Bimini to Palm Beach. The flight is supposed to take 80 minutes, ETA 4:20 p.m.
I reached the shoreline of Andros after flying for 10 minutes, and I could see that the storms weren't over the ocean of the Great Bahama Bank, so that looked good.
A sense of deception.
Then we noticed this strange cloud right in front of our flight path.
What is that in front of us?
It was about a mile long, half-mile wide, and about 1,000 feet thick.
Clouds like this are extremely unusual at such low altitudes. Bruce pulls back the control wheel to veer.
So we went ahead and climbed up over it.
150 meters above the clouds, they lull themselves into a sense of security.
I didn't realize that this small lenticular-shaped cloud had expanded tremendously, and it was right below our airplane. I kept climbing. I'm on a direct flight to Bimini. Now I'm at, say, 5,000, and I'm inside the cloud, and then I break free. And I get it maybe 200 feet above it, and then the airplane wasn't climbing fast enough. And here it comes again, and I go back inside it.
Bruce climbs higher and higher to escape the surprising weather conditions.
When we got to 10,000 feet, that's about 5 times that I had gone in and out of this thing. And my dad said to me, we better turn around and go back to Andros.
With more than 600 flight hours under his belt, Bruce had never experienced anything like this, a force of nature.
Visibility inside that storm was only maybe 50 feet. We thought maybe we could keep going until these flashes started appearing. The deeper we went, the more intense flashes became, and it almost got to the point where it was like pure black. My dad was the expert navigator, so I asked him for a position fix.
Something's wrong.
And he goes, something's wrong.
I don't know where we are.
He couldn't tell where we were. And then I noticed that the magnetic compass, this was slowly spinning all by itself.
What happened to Bruce Gurn on that day? What forces are at play in the Bermuda Triangle?
The Bermuda Triangle myth is so special because it's a modern myth. It's something which, even in this world of science, we cannot fully explain, and therefore we are curious about it.
It's not the first report of this kind. Charles Lindbergh, the legendary transatlantic aviator, experienced something similar. On February the 13th, 1928, he takes off on a non-stop flight from Havana, Cuba, to his home, St. Louis, Missouri. In his logbook, Lindbergh notes,
both compasses malfunctioned over Florida Strait. The liquid compass card rotated without stopping. Could recognize no stars through heavy haze. Liquid compass card kept rotating until the Spirit of St. Louis reached the Florida coast.
So we know that the compass spun around uncontrollably. He wasn't able to navigate by the stars. And when he finally found out where he was 300 miles off course near Bahama Island.
it's the same mysterious phenomenon that pilot Bruce Gurn would come to describe 40 years later. The waters between Florida, Puerto Rico, and the Bermuda Islands have been shrouded in legend for centuries. In 1492, Christopher Columbus was the first European to cross this sea area with a surface of 1.3 million square kilometers. He reports of strange natural occurrences and unusual light phenomena.
Christopher Columbus certainly saw a strange light, and nowadays, with our understanding of science, we can say perhaps it was a meteorite, perhaps it was bioluminescence from fish, but Christopher Columbus didn't have that knowledge, so to him, it certainly was a mystery.
In the centuries that follow, hundreds of Spanish and Portuguese ships, many laden with gold, go missing. In the 19th century, the number of reports about ships mysteriously disappearing skyrockets. Later, these reports also include airplanes. Sailors call the region the Devil's Triangle, or the graveyard of the Atlantic. It was not until the second half of the 20th century that the waters north of the Caribbean, between Miami, Puerto Rico, and the Bermuda Archipelago, were famously dubbed the Bermuda Triangle. Over the last 100 years, more than 50 ships and 20 airplanes are said to have vanished here without a trace. The exact numbers are a matter of debate.
The Bermuda Triangle is a mystery because of the scale of the stories associated with it. 1,000 lives have all vanished in mysterious circumstances, and many questions do remain unanswered.
The Bermuda Islands. This is where the myth begins. Philippe Rouillard knows the underwater world like no other. The archaeologist is in charge of the observation and conservation of historic shipwreck sites surrounding the islands.
The thing about shipwrecks is that we forget, we sort of think of them romantically today, but actually a shipwreck is a tragedy, and some of which we know a lot about, and some of which we know very little about, and of course there's still many more to discover.
Discovering shipwrecks, mapping the sites, and analyzing the remains. For over 16 years, Philippe Rouillard has been studying sunken ships.
Every shipwreck is a mystery. And for all the ones that we know about in Bermuda, there's another 100 around the Bermuda platform that still haven't been found.
Along busy sea routes, it's not uncommon to have areas with many shipwrecks. Oftentimes, dozens of wrecks are found next to each other. But there's no place in the world with as many shipwrecks per square kilometre as the Bermuda region. Experts know of more than 100 sunken ships that have been plotted, but believe there could be more than 300.
You know, you can see we're in the middle of nowhere. And yet here we are literally looking over. There's a shipwreck there, there's a shipwreck there, there's another one right there. And that's just kind of strange.
Today, Philippe Rouillard and his team are exploring two well-known wrecks.
You never really get a full picture of what's down there. And, you know, and if you had to dive on a day like this and, you know, when the water's this clear and calm, that's particularly special.
About 8 kilometers off the coast, Philippe prepares for his dive. His research helps scientists gain an insight into the circumstances that caused the naval accidents. 10 meters down, the Montana, a wreck dating back to the Civil War era. The ship carried weapons for the Confederates.
There's a concentration of ships here that speak to something about Bermuda that's quite curious.
Directly nearby are the remains of the Constellation, a 1940s cargo ship transporting cement bags. Today, they serve as an artificial reef and are a breeding place for fish.
You know, if there is a mystery, it's why does everything happen in the same spots?
The large coral reef surrounding the archipelago provides a very natural explanation. It's easy to make out from the air, but not from the water. Since the 17th century, a busy trade route has been bringing thousands of ships to Bermuda. During this time, seafarers saw the island as a landmark or used it as a stopover on their way to the New World, a dangerous waterway.
What makes Bermuda's reef so dangerous is, in fact, these breakers, as we call them. And they literally come right up to the surface, but on a day like this, they sit just below. And by the time you see it, you're looking down, you're hitting the reef.
Hundreds of ships were likely doomed by the razor-sharp reefs. But this doesn't explain why there also have been ships that sank far off the reef.
One of the fundamental questions about the Bermuda Triangle is, you know, what is this mystery all about? And the mystery here is, well, it's solved. We know what happened. But there are many others where we don't.
The USS Cyclops is one of the unresolved cases. March 3rd, 1918, World War I continues to rage on. It's the last time the large US Navy supply vessel is seen in the harbor of the Caribbean island of Barbados. The collier is carrying 10,000 tons of manganese ore to be used in munition manufacturers along the US East Coast. More than 300 crew and passengers are on board. In the evening hours, the Cyclops weighs anchor and disappears into the night. She will never reach her port of destination, Baltimore. To this day, there is still no trace of what was once the US Navy's largest ship and crew. No radio messages, no distress signals, no signs of life.
The USS Cyclops became very important because she was such a big ship, and she was also a new ship. And because she was so big, the real mystery was, where did she go?
Over 100 years later, author Marvin Barish is still intrigued by the disaster, not least for personal reasons.
I remember when I was a
young boy, my father used to tell me about his uncle who was lost on a Navy ship in the First World War. So I began to get into family history research. I started peeling back all the layers of the onion and started finding out a lot more than I ever thought I would know.
What happened to the USS Cyclops? Construction plans, freight reports, pictures. Marvin Barash collects any piece of information he can find.
Following the war, the U.S. Navy published a document that listed all the ships that were lost. The Cyclops was the only ship that right across the page was listed as mysteriously disappeared.
In their official report, the U.S. Navy concludes, there has been no more baffling mystery in the annals of the Navy than the disappearance of the USS Cyclops. It seems unlikely that the ship was sunk by German submarines. The disappearance of the USS Cyclops makes headlines. How can a ship this massive simply vanish into thin air?
Part of the fame to do with the event was also associated with the war. So she was lost during the war, and there was a great deal of fear over what the Germans might be doing with their U-boats. And although the Cyclops was not in waters that should have been fought over, perhaps the Germans were operating U-boats there. So there's a lot of fear associated with the war, which made this myth so powerful.
Suddenly, everyone starts talking about the insidious waters. Rumors link German saboteurs, supernatural forces, and even giant sea monsters to its disappearance. Marvin Barash is convinced there's a much simpler explanation for the fate of the USS Cyclops.
Well, the main business of the USS Cyclops was this: coal. Tons of this coal. On a final voyage, the business was a lot heavier. Manganese. Lifting the two side by side. This is like a feather. This is business.
10,000 tons of manganese ore in the hold, and the freight report reveals they had exceeded this amount by over 85 tons.
The ship was well documented as having a stability issue. You have a lot of cargo on board that nobody had any experience with. And was it loaded correctly? The people that loaded the cargo take into consideration the balance. It's just like a formula for a disaster. They're just waiting for the right time.
The ship's structural engineering was probably not the only problem. Marvin Barash has discovered another lead in the documents.
The USS Cyclops had two engines, a port engine, starboard engine. The starboard engine broke. This is probably a significant factor as to why the ship was lost, just not having the power maybe to fight off a storm or other sea conditions.
During hurricane season, the Bermuda Triangle is often subject to major changes in the weather, which can be dangerous for even the most experienced seafarers.
There's this U.S. Weather Bureau chart that indicates that there's a large weather system on the east coast of the United States that could have indeed traveled with this large low system into the area where the Cyclops was on her way home. So weather was probably a major factor in her disappearance.
But if the USS Cyclops was in distress, why didn't she call for help? And why has no wreckage been found?
I suspect a rogue wave, the type of thing that would not have been anticipated. Without warning, no time to prepare, and I suspect likely at night.
Could one single huge wave really swallow a mighty cargo vessel? For centuries, sailors spoke about waves as high as mountains coming out of nowhere, dragging ships under. For a long time, their reports were dismissed as being nothing more than a sailor's yarn. But today's scientists are sure they exist. Waves up to 30 meters high, known to seafarers as rogue or monster waves.
Big fish and big wave myths have been told for as long as humans have been at sea. And scientists have long wanted to dismiss the possibility of these gargantuan waves that are talked about at pubs and fishing ports. But recent science has confirmed the existence of these rogue waves.
The Coastal Research Center in Hanover, Germany. Here, scientists are taking a closer look into the destructive power of the rogue waves. From inside a wave channel 310 meters long, the largest of its kind.
I wanted to see, just like in the video, which one's the right wave length when placing the boat in the water.
Can one single wave sink a large ship like the USS Cyclops? Or even a modern container ship?
When you make really short waves, the boat would respond in a similar way, plunge into the trough of the wave.
Stefan hopes an experiment will lead to answers.
Our wave machine basically allows us to produce any kind of wave, like single waves to simulate tsunamis, or rogue waves, as in this case.
Monster waves develop when several swells of different lengths overlap. Long waves travel faster and can overtake shorter waves. As the wave heights combine, they become a rogue wave.
Rogue waves can occur very suddenly. This means they can basically form at any place at any time, by pure chance. And they vanish just as rapidly as they came.
Using a model ship, the researchers demonstrate the impact of a rogue wave. The team simulates rough sea conditions using the hydraulic wave machine. While the waves cause the ship to bob up and down, it's not in any danger yet.
The waves were 40 centimeters high. In nature, this would equal a wave height of 12 meters. That's quite a storm.
Now they'll conduct the rogue wave test.
Monster waves are defined as being extremely high and extremely short at the same time. Matthias, you can start the wave now. Okay, wave coming up.
Within seconds, a deadly wall of water has built up. By the time the ship's crews have spotted the wave, it's already too late.
What we could see here was how the ship first got sucked into that deep trough preceding the wave. And then it got pushed up. After essentially being capsized by the wave crashing down.
The crew had no chance to send out a distress signal.
If that had happened in real life, there probably wouldn't have been any survivors.
Did the USS Cyclops fall victim to a similar rogue wave? The sunken ship falls into oblivion. But in 1941, during World War II, the sister ships of the USS Cyclops, Proteus and Nereus, disappear. Both were carrying ore. Wild speculations are spreading. Newspapers talk about the Sea of Doom. Experts disagree on what really happened to the two sister ships. One thing is certain. The design of the freighters made them potentially dangerous vessels for the crew at rough sea. Anywhere, not just in the Bermuda Triangle. Just 4 years later, yet another tragedy draws public attention to the mysterious waters. An entire squadron disappears for no apparent reason. Around noon on December the 5th, 1945, 5 US torpedo bombers take off from their base in Florida. The weather is good. It's a routine training flight, targeted bombing and navigating above open water. Halfway into it, the flight leader reports difficulties with his compass. The pilots lose orientation. Soon after, their radio transmissions end. To this day, all 14 crew members and their bombers have yet to be found.
Flight 19 became so famous because it wasn't just one plane, it wasn't just one ship, it was 5 planes. It was an entire squadron, and they were never found.
Sylvia Riley, pilot and author, investigates the mysterious disappearance of Flight 19. Back in the 1940s, navigating a plane was much more of a challenge than it is today.
We can see all the instruments here that they were really looking at. So you've got the compass up top, you've then got the directional indicator, which you're setting in line with your compass. You've got a clock there that you use to time each leg. You can see your indicated airspeed. So you're using the time that you're flying and the speed that you are flying, and you multiply them to get the distance. And that's how you work out your location.
Berlin. Sylvia Riley sets out to reenact the military training operation using a flight simulator.
Foxtrot Tango 28 departing. So we're now departing from Fort Lauderdale, heading straight to the east. We'll just take off and start climbing. Flaps up, and now we're heading straight out over the Atlantic. Now, because we're in an Airbus A320, I'm able to set the power to go automatically and the autopilot on, and the autopilot is now doing almost everything for me. If you were in a 1940s plane, you would have none of this. You are flying by dead reckoning.
Riley turns off the electronic instruments to simulate the flight conditions of the squadron 75 years ago.
There's all these alarms going off and tones, and I have lost my map. Okay, the pilots of the flight also didn't have a map or the different gadgets that we've now turned off here. So at this point, this is similar to the situation that they were in, but they were probably a little bit better than I am at it.
Flight 19 got into trouble when the compass stopped working, and then the weather deteriorated on top of that. Sylvia Riley simulates the situation.
The wind is getting worse, which means a magnetic compass bounces around. It's not really easy to use. Even with that still working, I would be hard-pressed to know whether I was going due north or not. If I'm worried that my compass isn't working, it's very nerve-wracking, and at this point, personally, I have no idea where we are.
The brewing storm makes it impossible for the pilots of Flight 19 to know where they're going.
The sun is setting, so I'm hoping that that is west. But because of this weather, it's difficult to really feel confident about that. And it's just impossible to really know where I am.
The machines have been up in the air for 4 hours. They're running out of fuel, and there's no land in sight. Sylvia Riley ends up in the same situation.
At this point, I'm out of fuel. I can't climb. The only thing I can do is try and come down gently, but there's high waves out there and a thunderstorm. There's no way I'm going to land on this water. I'm going to freeze to death if it's gone. crashed. That was so realistic, that was frightening. I am so relieved that this is a simulation. I never want to have to go through that in real life. This was such a high-stress situation, using every bit of my mental powers just then, just to try and keep a plane in the air. How much worse must it be when you know that not just your life, but the life of 14 people are dependent on your making the right decision right now?
Navy flying boats try to localize the missing squadron. After searching for hours, they give up. One of the machines calls in a radio message. Moments later, it also disappears without a trace. The 14 young men of Flight 19 and their bombers are missing to this day. Sylvia Riley has a theory on what exactly happened. A fateful decision by flight leader Charles Taylor might have caused the men to fly further and further out to sea.
The Navy investigation is very useful. So one thing we've got here is the original transcript. We have exactly what Foxtrot Tango 28 said whilst in the air to his other pilots. So he's continuously modifying the instructions for the squadron to head towards the east, when the entire time what they needed to do was go west.
As they run out of fuel, the pilots are left with one option: an emergency landing on the water. At rough sea, this is a death sentence. No wreckage from Flight 19 has ever been found.
Even today, after plane crashes, we do not always find all the wreckage. There are natural explanations for this, for example, that they've sunken down to the bottom of the sea where they've been covered by sand, or that they have broken to pieces so small that they can no longer be identified as wreckage.
But there are unanswered questions to this day. Why did the flight leader become so disoriented? And why didn't his compass work?
There's only a very few true mysteries that are connected to the Bermuda Triangle, but Flight 19 is absolutely one of them. I find it amazing that with so many people interested, with the mystery that started the Bermuda Triangle and from which so many of our Bermuda Triangle myths are created, that we still don't know what happened, that there's just no way of finding out an answer. And I find that bewildering, but also fascinating.
The report from the US Navy's final investigation states, the disappearance of Flight 19 is one of the greatest mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle. A legend is born.
Flight 19 is such a powerful part of the myth, partly because it was the loss of a group of young men who mythically become heroes, and they are the main characters in this particular saga. So as a consequence, they have huge power.
Hollywood capitalizes on the story. Author Charles Berlitz writes a bestseller. The whole world is captivated by the enigmatic events taking place in the Sea of Doom.
The Bermuda Triangle first became popular when the American author Charles Berlitz wrote a book in the 1970s. Some 20 million copies were sold. It was translated into 30 different languages, and he identified a number of alleged incidents which happened in the Bermuda Triangle. The problem was, however, that a lot of Charles Berlitz's evidence was wrong.
And indeed, many of Charles Berlitz's examples are fake news. Statistics show there are just as many accidents in the Bermuda Triangle as in any other highly frequented maritime area. But the myth takes on a life of its own. Soon rumors spread saying aliens or the crystal energy from the lost city of Atlantis are responsible for the sinking of countless planes and ships.
Many people don't want to believe in a world without miracles because this, conscious or not, means that it's a world without soul or free will. And so we project our desire for there to be a soul or free will onto a desire for there to be miracles and odd events. If this strange stuff can't happen there, then maybe it can't happen anywhere.
What's not a myth are the compass anomalies often experienced in the Bermuda Triangle. They're real. But what causes these interferences? For decades, scientists were in the dark about this. Today, they found a plausible explanation at the bottom of the sea. The Bermuda Islands are the remnants of an ancient volcano that formed more than 30 million years ago. Witnesses of an apocalyptic moment in the history of our planet. Nick Hutchings explores this region.
If we were standing in this exact spot 33 million years ago, we would be under 3,000 feet of lava. This was a big volcanic island then.
Over millions of years, the volcanic rock is eroded by wind and weather and washed into the sea.
It probably took about 19 million years to erode away down to nothing, down to sea level. Most of that is now spread out around Bermuda.
Today, a layer of lava sand 150 meters thick covers the ocean floor around the islands. Hutchings believes the volcanic floor could explain some of the phenomena observed in the Bermuda Triangle.
You can see it very clearly here now, this black sand. This is the volcanic remains of the old volcanic island. This is really the only place that we can see this now up on dry land. The rest of it is all washed into the sea and is in a big layer. And in that layer is about 500 billion tons of magnetite. And magnetite is the most magnetic, naturally occurring mineral on Earth. And the magnetite in these heavy minerals here, this is enough to affect a compass, just this little bit here. And as you can see, as we move the compass over here, it moves. It's not a lot, 3 or 4 degrees, but that'd be enough to cause a disaster. You can imagine what 500 billion tons might do.
Official nautical charts warn seafarers of compass anomalies with deviations of up to 14 degrees.
I mean, essentially, Bermuda is just a huge magnet sitting right out in the middle of the ocean.
Conventional magnetic compasses have been known to suddenly point in a different direction. This can cause ships and planes to go off course or accidentally fly into storms. This likely explains many disasters. Yet the myth of the Bermuda Triangle lives on. For some, it's more about believing than knowing.
The Bermuda Triangle myth persists partly because scientists haven't been able to categorically explain what happens in the triangle, and therefore it's fulfilling the function of all myths throughout the time, and that is to explain the inexplicable.
Like the experience of Bruce Gernon and his dad on their flight from the Bahamas to Palm Beach on December the 4th, 1970. At 3,500 meters altitude, the aircraft is suddenly surrounded by a mysterious cloud.
And then I see this horizontal tunnel. But I thought that would be the only way to escape the inside of the storm. When I entered the tunnel, these strange lines instantly formed. And then I noticed that the lines were slowly rotating counterclockwise, and they went all the way to the other end of the tunnel. All the navigational instruments were malfunctioning. Even the compass was slowly spinning all by itself.
The plane disappears from the air traffic control radars.
The Miami radio couldn't find our location, so my dad got on the radio and he said, what do you mean you can't find our location? And he started cussing at the guy, which is something that he's never done before.
Trying to get out of the tunnel, Bruce Gernon pushes a 300-horsepower machine to its limits.
When I looked back after we got out of the tunnel, I watched it collapse right behind us. And at the same time, I felt this incredible sensation of zero gravity combined with the feeling of hydroplaning, like skidding forward at zero gravity. The air traffic controller comes back on the radio and he's really excited. And he says he's got an airplane directly over Miami Beach. And so I look at my watch and, well, I've been flying just over 33 minutes. I told him, no, that's not us. And then my eyes started to focus. And I look below, and there's Miami Beach right below us, and we're at 10,000 feet.
Once Bruce Gernon reaches Palm Beach as planned and checks the time, he realizes that only 47 minutes have passed since takeoff.
I had made that identical flight at least a dozen times on a direct course, and it took an hour and 20 minutes. And this was an indirect course, maybe 50 miles longer, and it took only 47 minutes. So I didn't quite understand what had happened, but I realized that something amazing had happened.
Bruce Gernon believes he got sucked into a time tunnel. To this day, there is still no evidence corroborating his theory. But he's not the only one who believes in mysterious unknown forces. John Cusack has been investigating mysterious events in the Bermuda Triangle for over 30 years. He was the first to systematically study the accident reports of the U.S. Transportation Safety Board.
This is the entire computer database printout at the National Transportation Safety Board from 30 years ago, when I made a request for them to give me a database search of all aircraft listed as missing or not recovered.
Nowadays, the records are available in digital form. The database lists every incident that took place in U.S. airspace since 1964.
What's important is to compare cases and data over a long period of time instead of just one incident and speculating on it. I discovered aircraft that had vanished while coming in for a landing on radar, that had essentially eyewitnesses, and that vanished close to shore, that vanished over shallow water and left no wreckage.
Cusack claims he has identified 75 mysterious events in the database that happened in the Bermuda Triangle.
It's not subjective, like sighting Bigfoot or flying saucers or Loch Ness Monster. These were real aircraft and real ships. They're in the records. The people were really aboard them, and they all vanished.
Like flight NH-3808, a light sport aircraft flown by Maldonado Torres and his friend Jose Pagan Santos.
One of the most interesting cases is the documented case of the encounter with a UFO. This was on June 28, 1980. This was an air coupe, a twin-engine small light aircraft that was owned by the passenger's father. That's the passenger. The aircraft is presumed ditched at sea, and both occupants deceased. And the transcript was completely preserved. And here it is.
Cusack has the radio messages.
This is Jose Maldonado Torres and Pagan Santos' last words, or they transposed into mystery. This is the Mayday he sent off Puerto Rico.
June the 28th, 1980, the two men are on their way from Santo Domingo to San Juan in a small sports aircraft when they suddenly see an unidentified flying object. The pilot tries repeatedly to get away from the object, but to no avail.
You're listening to a man die, basically, or more accurately, transposing the mystery.
It's the last time anyone heard from the men. After that message, their aircraft vanishes from the radar. Nobody knows what the two men encountered. The ultimate fate of flight NH3808 remains unknown to this day. Time and again, reports and videos surface, allegedly documenting similar encounters with UFOs. An amateur video taken aboard a cruise ship in the Bermuda Triangle in 2009.
Okay, 2 UFOs on the damn, what ship we on? What boat is this?
Carnival Sensation.
Carnival Sensation. What's the date?
Today's the 1st of October.
October the 1st, 2009. 2 fucking UFOs. One of them moving to the left. Look, come here. This one on the left is moving. Come check it out. Look. Are you watching? There's a helicopter. There's an airplane in the clouds up to the right. For perspective to see how low these things are. Look at the one on the right moving. It's disappeared. You see it?
Well, it's very commonplace what they're reporting. Lights floating on the horizon. He mentions that they're facing the ship.
Look at the one on the right moving. It's disappeared. You see it? Just went away. Now the one on the left is still here.
Oh my God.
It's impossible to prove the authenticity of the footage, just as it remains unclear what it really shows. But to Kusar, online findings like this support his theories.
They put this up on YouTube, and so it seems authentic. You know, it's reporting things that are commonly known. It's reported since the earliest UFO investigations that when aircraft approach these, they'll wink out or zip away. And that's the case here. An aircraft is approaching on the right of the screen, and then the one closest to it zips out.
Ufologists like Kusar can now even refer to official US government releases. Recently, the US Navy declassified footage supposedly documenting encounters between UFOs and their fighter jets.
Remarkably, the Pentagon released the footage of all this. It's just yet another sighting that Pentagon is refreshingly admitting to.
People have tried to explain UFO sightings like these. Theories range from weather balloons to hang gliders and secret weapon systems. John Kusar doesn't have a logical explanation for the events either, but he doesn't believe in little green men.
The ships and planes do vanish, and they obviously have a cause. And so if you uncover real mystery, it should be considered a little more unnerving because there's a real cause behind it that you have to deal with.
A dark cloud, malfunctioning instruments, and a mysterious time tunnel. Now, Bruce Gernon thinks he knows what happened to him 50 years ago above the Bermuda Triangle.
It took me 30 years of researching this, thinking about it every day, before I finally came up with the theory that this fog, and I call it electronic fog, connects to the aircraft. If it attaches to you, you can become disoriented, and it can induce spatial disorientation into your mind.
A theory without any evidence. But Gernon is convinced it will be proven one day.
It's been tough sometimes when people try to debunk me, but I'm always willing to talk to anybody that wants to challenge me about it, because I know exactly what happened. So this is an incredible event that happened, so it's going to take incredible proof to prove it. And I know it'll be proven in the future. It may be another 50 years or so.
The Bermuda Triangle, a place for speculation of every kind.
The Bermuda Triangle doesn't stand out statistically as much as it stands out in our imaginations. It becomes a place where we project whatever our myth is. If your myth is that everything's explainable, you're projecting that onto the Bermuda Triangle. If your myth is that there are aliens or Atlantis, that also is then going to be what you project onto the Bermuda Triangle.
Whether it's a dark force or a force of nature, paranormal activity or physical forces, people won't stop trying to solve the mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle. And the myth is sure to be the subject of wild speculations and extraordinary theories in the years to come. The most prosperous city of all time, suddenly destroyed by an enormous catastrophe. Atlantis, the lost paradise of the antiquity.
Atlantis is like an end-of-the-world story that happened at the beginning.
Researchers are looking for the legendary city.
I do think that Atlantis existed.
Where was this mythical island located? Are there any traces of the Atlanteans? Will Atlantis ever be found? The great myths of mankind. Mysteries passed on over thousands of years. Inexplicable events, places shrouded in legend, and superhuman heroes. Even scientists are fascinated. Is there any truth to these ancient legends? Researchers across the globe are working hard to solve the greatest mysteries of our time. Greece, the island of Santorini. Some researchers believe this is the former site of Atlantis. Geologist Avi Nomikou first heard about Atlantis when she was a child. But how to tell truth from legend?
When I was a child, the grandfathers always telling us stories about the myth of Atlantis. They told us about a brilliant city that was decorated with high buildings, and all the people were very rich. And that city was just in the middle of a volcano.
Santorini is an island in the southern Aegean Sea. Its ring-like structure points to a volcanic inferno. The crater island near Kameni at its heart. The Caldera is surrounded by land emerging from the sea. The legendary city of Atlantis is said to have consisted of 3 aquatic and 2 terrestrial rings encircling the main island. That's why many believe that Santorini must be where Atlantis was. Could Atlantis be buried underneath the rugged volcanic landscape? Geologist Avi Nomikou specializes in volcanoes. She grew up here. Could the city of Atlantis that her grandfathers told her about really be on this volcanic island?
Before 3,600 years, at this place, there was a small island with the same geometry, with the same composition, lava composition, and at the top of this volcano, a city was built on.
Was it truly Atlantis? Had it been annihilated by a massive eruption? The Santorini volcano has erupted several times over the past 3,000 years, but the first lead points us 200 kilometers northwest. To Athens. In 360 BC, philosopher Plato described Atlantis as a splendid island nation which had ruled over the entire Mediterranean region 9,000 years earlier, with a commanding fleet, untold wealth, and unparalleled power. The capital has a large commercial port. The Atlantean battleships are even said to have defied the Athenian naval power. Navigable canals run through the entire city. In the center, there's an acropolis with a temple for Poseidon, the god of the seas. The buildings and streets are embellished with gold, silver, and a fiery toned metal, bearing testimony of their once glamorous population.
According to the Greek myths, the gods divided up the world, and appropriately for Poseidon as god of the sea, he was given an island. He then had many children, 5 sets of twins, and he gave the most beautiful part of his island to his firstborn son, Atlas. And in Greek, Atlantis literally means Atlas's island.
According to Plato, the land is particularly fertile and home to a rich flora and fauna, including exotic elephants. But one day, the thriving metropolis falls victim to a natural catastrophe. According to Plato, the earthquakes and floods are the gods' way of punishing the Atlanteans for their sinful lifestyle.
The myth of Atlantis is important to us today because it's the story of a once highly developed culture which was lost, which has utterly disappeared. It's a story of hubris, it's a story of punishment, and in the modern world in which we think we know so much, we celebrate our achievements, well, it serves as a pretty powerful warning.
But is Atlantis completely buried? Or can we still find traces of the legendary city today? Sunken cities are not rare. Bayer, off the Neapolitan coast, is a paradise for divers. Places like this keep the hope alive that Atlantis will also be discovered one day. The extent of the volcano's destruction is visible on Santorini to this day. The volcanic sediments reach high into the sky in this former quarry. A 30-meter layer of pumice has buried all traces of life.
So we are at the central part of Santorini volcano in an old quarry. For us, it's a geological monument, and you can admire the soil, the landscape before the Minoan eruption. So you need to imagine that the people were walking on this landscape.
According to Plato, the Atlanteans are progressive and hungry for knowledge, but also arrogant, autocratic, and bellicose. The gods punish them for their insolence and lifestyle.
We can see the thin layer of the precursory explosion, only 10 centimeters or less. We don't know the exact time, but lots of earthquakes occur during this first explosion. Then the main eruption started, and the first phase is the Plinian column with the ash up to 39 kilometers in the air.
Commercial aircraft only fly at 10 kilometers altitude for comparison. The ash column that Santorini volcano shot into the air in 1600 BC was 39 kilometers high.
Plato could have been inspired by all sorts of natural events, tsunamis and floods. One of them might have been the Minoan eruption. It was a cataclysmic event, and we know that it was felt right across the Mediterranean from Greece to Egypt.
The volcano buries the entire island, wreaking havoc. Temples, roads, and ships are torn up, destroyed, and swallowed by the lava. The eruption was extremely powerful. This is because the massive rocks didn't melt and move. The crater just became clogged with boulders, and eventually it exploded. In 1980, Mount St. Helens in Washington, USA, faced the same fate. The volcano erupted with destructive power. Was Atlantis wiped out by a volcanic catastrophe? One thing we know for sure is that the legend of pride and fall has impressed generations worldwide. The myth of Atlantis enthralls many. Pondering about what the legendary empire might have looked like has led to countless books, films, and computer games. Many people are not only looking for the location, but also to experience the superhuman force that Atlantis is said to emit. In Germany, the search for Atlantis has been popular since as early as the 1920s. In Bremen, an entire new building was dedicated to exploring the past. The Atlantis House is home to a heritage center meant to bring light into the alleged history of Germanic peoples as the descendants of Atlantis. On its facade, the Tree of Life, a prominent feature in Nordic mythology. The modern use of forms in the Art Deco staircase and the Sky Room are meant to give the viewer a glimpse into the myth of Atlantis.
Throughout the 19th century, many people searched for Atlantis. Spiritists, occultists, and psychics believed they could find Atlantis or that it would re-emerge. Later, the Nazis evidently put a great deal of effort into pursuing anything that fit into their ideology, which also included finding Atlantis.
Atlantis House was built by an SS patron member who shared SS Chief Heinrich Himmler's firm belief in the supremacy of the Nordic race. Himmler invests large sums trying to prove that the Teutons descend from the Atlanteans. He hopes archaeologists will find evidence of ancient Aryans in Atlantis. Their search took them as far as Tibet. Ernst Schaefer was the head of the expedition. He believed the survivors of Atlantis found shelter on the Tibetan plateau. He left empty-handed. The belief in Atlantis is also fueled by the discovery of another city shrouded in legend. For centuries, Troy was thought to be a myth described in the Iliad by the Greek poet Homer. In 1870, Heinrich Schliemann finds the ancient city of Troy in today's Turkey. The myth becomes a reality. Can Atlantis be found too?
We have so many stories about Atlantis. It is a magical undersea world. And if you were the archaeologist to discover that, like the discovery of Troy, you would go down in history.
US researcher Richard Freund is convinced that he'll be able to unearth Atlantis. He's an expert on the archaeology of mythical cities and firmly believes that Atlantis did exist. He is basing his search on descriptions by Greek philosopher Plato. But Richard Freund isn't looking in Greece. He's got his eyes set on southern Spain, not far from the Straits of Gibraltar. He believes that the remains of Atlantis are hidden in the sand dunes of the Doñana National Park.
We are at ground zero for Atlantis.
Freund has a theory. He believes that the stretches of land now covered in sand were once a thriving island state, until Atlantis was destroyed by a devastating tsunami.
Plato says in one fateful night, the entire city sunk and was located in an impassable mud and disappeared. Meaning it's not something that happened over a long period of time. He's talking about a cataclysmic, catastrophic end to the city.
To Freund, it's just a matter of time until he finds the first piece of evidence here in southern Spain. And indeed, the location of Doñana National Park matches Plato's description astonishingly well.
Plato says it's located by the Pillars of Hercules. The Pillars of Hercules was known by ancient mariners as being a very specific spot. So it's not located in Africa or India or Asia. It's located by the Pillars of Hercules, which today we call the Strait of Gibraltar.
Doñana National Park is about 80 kilometers northwest of Gibraltar. During the antiquity, the prominent rocks on the European and African side mark the end of the known world.
In the antiquity, this whole area of the Doñana was an open bay. You had this big, massive open bay where ships could come in and ships could go out to the Atlantic and into the Mediterranean. This was the end of the earth for almost every single ancient mariner.
Freund believes that ships used to be able to navigate through what we know today as marshland. If you imagine it with canals and ring-shaped islands, it looks just like Plato's descriptions of Atlantis.
So this really is the place. You're looking at ground zero in these dunes. The ocean, the dunes, and the location of the city.
Atlantis could be very real. In fact, there could be multiple Atlantises. Plato places it where the Atlantic opens out into the Mediterranean. And typically, huge cities with lots of wealth grow up in places that control this kind of a strait. We think of Troy or Constantinople. So in some ways, it's kind of hard to imagine that there wouldn't have been a great city there.
Plato claims he received his information from an ancestor who described the Atlanteans as a superior civilization with vast expertise in weapons technology and metalwork. Not far from the national park, there is a place that could reveal more about Atlantis. A building 5,000 years old, made of massive stones. The unusual monument is discovered and excavated during construction works in the 1920s. It's a Neolithic tomb site and provides a glimpse into a fascinating culture. Archaeologist Claudio Lozano is keen on finding out more about the people who once lived here. The finds from the dolmen bring up many questions. In the stone, there are engravings and incisions. Could these maybe be star maps like the ones used by seafarers? How the weapons were depicted, which were most likely made of metal, is even more intriguing.
What makes this dolmen special is that most of the stone pillars were decorated with pictograms. And here we see they depict weapons, metal weapons.
Do these pictures date back to the time when the burial site was built? Or were they added to the stones at a later date? Plato did mention a rare metal in Atlantis. Is the dolmen the Atlantean survivors' claim to immortality? The dolmen is proof of a highly functional and progressive settlement in southern Spain dating back more than 5,000 years. Early civilizations almost exclusively settled near water. Archaeological finds are particularly common along coastlines and rivers.
Water is the source of life. Humans need water to drink, they need water to cook, to farm, and water also provides transport. It's why water really is the cradle of civilization, and most successful civilizations sprang up near sources of water.
To find traces of ancient civilizations, you have to know where rivers used to run. Huelva Port, early morning. A research catamaran is waiting for Claudio Lozano and his team. They want to have a closer look at the sea floor in front of the Doñana National Park. Over thousands of years, the coastline has changed dramatically. Water covers what once was land with rivers running through it. Is this the location of Plato's Atlantis, the city beyond the Pillars of Hercules?
We're now following the coastline towards a stretch of sea across from the Rio Piedras. The place we're headed to used to be the estuary of this river, somewhere between 9,000 and 10,000 BC.
10,000 years ago, the coastline was about 125 meters further west. Claudio Lozano hopes his search for old river channels will help him find former settlements, or ideally, the ruins of Atlantis.
We've been here a couple of times, but we want to take a closer look at this particular spot. And this time we're using a high-precision sonar. This spot is perpendicular to the coastline and is exactly where the estuary was.
Maritime archaeologist Claudio Lozano and soil investigation expert Miguel Gonzalez hope to finally come up with solid evidence. Their sensitive sonar device picks up even the slightest elevations on the ocean floor. This also allows them to find river channels that are thousands of years old.
This is where we choose the frequency.
If they find proof of these former estuaries, it could point to an ancient civilization. Advanced civilizations like Atlantis always built their cities close to water.
This broad perspective on the sea floor shows us exactly what it looks like and where there are shapes pointing to a former estuary. This case is a perfect example. It's obvious that this used to be a riverbed. Now it's covered by ocean floor. It's filled with sediments, but the sonar allows us to detect the riverbed below the ocean floor. Examining these riverbeds is key. Getting closer to the riverbeds means we're getting closer to where people built their settlements.
The site they're looking for is almost 2 kilometers off the coast. Does the sea floor have something to show us? Diving is the only way to find out. They're looking for an ancient riverbed, hoping to maybe even find the remains of a settlement. The researchers look for geological clues. Nature leaves its marks even after 10,000 years. The divers find pebbles on the ocean floor that were clearly brought there by rivers, showing that this floor wasn't always covered by the sea. A success for Claudio Lozano and his team. They've found the estuary of a long-forgotten river, and therefore maybe also a first glimpse into a human settlement. But they're still a long way from finding actual proof that Atlantis existed in southern Spain. The searchers won't give up. Richard Freund's hypothesis that Atlantis was a powerful harbor city near Gibraltar remains one of several possibilities.
Atlantis has become a kind of repository in our imagination for all these lost lands that were before a flood or some ancient forgotten place. And there are very real cities that were lost to coastlines and the flooding that would have happened there. It's possible that Atlantis is a kind of combination of real lost places and some mythical notion of a time before time.
Santorini, an island in the Aegean Sea, has been of interest to those looking for Atlantis for a while now. Over 3,600 years ago, a devastating eruption shook the island. Neolithic is in the center of the Caldera. To geologist Avi Nomiku, this is the epicenter of the catastrophe that sealed the fate of all living beings for kilometers around, an event that left its traces on history.
Neolithic has been created due to the fact that it has many different volcanic centers that gives lava.
We don't know of any other eruption more destructive than the one in the 16th century BC. It affected all civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean and even destroyed the Minoan culture on Crete, some 200 kilometers away. Some believe that Atlantis actually is Crete.
Two great civilizations existed around the Greek islands of Crete and Santorini, the Cycladic and the Minoan cultures. They were related to each other, and they shared some similarities with the Atlanteans as described by Plato. So there's every chance that they were actually related to those people.
The volcanic eruption on Santorini triggers a tsunami, wiping out all inhabited coastal regions in the eastern Mediterranean. The northern hemisphere faces several years of winter. The Minoan Empire on Crete ceases to exist. An actual natural catastrophe. Is this the origin of the legend of Atlantis? Afi Nomiku is looking for traces of a lost advanced civilization on Santorini. She's heading to the Akrotiri excavation site. Together with Ioannis Bitis, an architect, Afi visits the remains of a settlement once covered by volcanic ash. These cultural artifacts were hidden for thousands of years and weren't discovered until 1967. Archaeologists are staggered by what they find here, buildings several stories high with sophisticated details. This level of advancement can only be attributed to the Atlanteans, according to Plato.
The special thing is that we have the chance to have a very good preservation of the artifacts and of the architecture of a prehistoric city. The ash that covered all the entire city helped all the materials and the buildings to survive until our times.
The architectural style in Akrotiri is not typical for antiquity. Large windows and up to 3 stories high, toilets inside buildings. These must have been the homes of affluent people.
The lavatory is quite a surprise for the archaeologist because usually we found these kind of places outside of the houses. Instead here we have already 3,000 years ago, the mentality of placing the lavatory inside the building.
They also found beautiful murals showing women with precious jewels. What happened to these people? Were the residents of Akrotiri able to escape on boats? By the time the eruption hits the city, everyone has already gone.
Here we can see a building, only 1 floor, okay, that has been covered completely by the huge volume of pumice. So just in front of us, at the bottom, you can distinguish the first layer of the Minoan eruption. Up to now, we didn't find any bodies, so we do believe that the people escaped before the last phase, before the Minoan eruption started to be very destructive.
No dead bodies and no signs of survivors. Just impressive evidence of a lost civilization. The finds are preserved in the prehistoric museum in the island's capital, Fira. Costas Sakavaras might be the greatest expert when it comes to these artifacts and their history. Proudly, he presents a table.
So this is the plaster cast of a very elaborate piece of furniture. It shows us the sophistication level of this ancient society, because it's a piece that very much reminds us also of modern pieces.
The wood of the table burned in the heat of the eruption. All that remains is a detailed cast. Thousands of objects tell the story of an incredibly rich city that disappeared.
This is foreign pottery that was found in Akrotiri.
Okay.
So we have Aegina, we have Greek mainland, we have also islands, nearby islands like Kea or Naxos, or even a little bit farther islands, Kos, Dodecanese region, and definitely Crete, which was a superpower of its time.
The collection even contains objects from the Middle East and Egypt. Little boxes for perfumes, jewelry, and artistic vases.
It tells us that this is an affluent society that had covered its very basic survival needs and had an appetite also for some luxury wear, exotic stuff that was brought from other places.
So it seems to be that the place in Akrotiri, or the Atlantic city, was the center of that civilization. So it seems to be a commercial center of the Eastern Mediterranean.
A fresco that was well preserved also points to the importance of trade. The image has scientists' heads turning. Does it depict Atlantis? Many details match. A large fleet, the capital surrounded by water and red rocks, just as Plato describes it. Red rocks can be seen on Santorini to this day. Are they leading us to Atlantis?
All these rocks are very old rocks, and they have not been covered by the Minoan deposits. You can see that the this red scoria is full of iron, okay? And from the frescoes, you can imagine that the port, a separate port, was also located in this area.
Astonishing parallels. Did the heart of the story of Atlantis take place here on Santorini? A port from which residents escaped when the volcano erupted?
I do think that Atlantis existed. Yes, it's a very good story, but all of the great stories do have an element of truth deep down inside them.
But one thing doesn't add up in the Santorini theory. According to Plato, Atlantis is located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, behind Gibraltar. Researchers and explorers are looking for Atlantis almost everywhere in the world. In the Bahamas, in Brazil, in the Canary Islands, in the North Sea, or on Sri Lanka. Central America is among the top candidates. The founding myth of the Aztecs is said to contain clues. It refers to a mythical place called Aztlan, and it's not just a name that bears a striking resemblance to Atlantis. Aztlan is also said to have been located on an island. In the 14th century, the Aztecs built their huge capital Tenochtitlan in a lake in Mexico. Are they reminiscing about their sunken hometown of Atlantis? But how would Greek philosopher Plato have come to hear about a story from Central America almost 2,000 years before Columbus?
One of the reasons why Atlantis is so curious and fascinating has to do with the way it may or may not play into ancient civilizations. And if it does play a role, it's probably as this seafaring culture that's extended across a kind of nodal network. The other thing about Atlantis is that it represents a time before the flood, just like Eden. So it's kind of this mythic memory of an ancient past.
Michael Ertl thinks he knows where Atlantis is located. On his YouTube channel, he spends his time investigating great myths. Ertl believes Atlantis was discovered a long time ago in a place that's now far away from the sea.
Hello and welcome to a new episode on my YouTube channel. Today we're looking into the theory of Atlantis and whether this city really existed. Or is it just a legend? Well, today we're going to get to the bottom of this question. It's been investigated many times and some believe this ancient civilization was based in Santorini or somewhere along the Spanish coast. But today we want to talk about a structure that was first discovered in 1965 during the Gemini 4 mission. It can only really be seen from space and is located in Western Africa. It is called the Eye of the Sahara, or the Richard structure.
There's a rock formation in Mauritania in Western Africa that really looks like an eye. Or like the island city of Atlantis. In the beginning, experts believed this structure was a crater from a meteor, but nothing points to an impact. Michael Uttle sees another parallel to Atlantis.
In his works, Plato writes that Atlantis consisted of 3 rings of water and 2 rings of land, and we can actually see this here, the central island, the first and second rings of land, separated by rings of water. So in total there are 3 aquatic rings and 2 terrestrial rings. But of course, we're still left wondering whether this is a natural structure or one that is man-made.
An island city without any water? But this area wasn't always a desert. In the last ice age, there were rivers and freshwater lakes in northern Africa. Uttle shows us footage from an expedition to the Eye of the Sahara. If you're standing inside the rings, they look like mountain ranges. Only once you're far away are you able to imagine this area was once inhabited. An important discovery, a well. To this day, caravans take a break in the Eye of the Sahara to fill up on their water supply. Could a well like this also have been the Atlanteans' freshwater source? And how is it possible that this structure in the Sahara points to the home of a once great naval power? Michael Uttle subscribes to the theory that the sea level was much higher 10,000 years ago and only dropped after the last ice age. Simulating the sea level over time, Uttle notices something.
If you raise the sea level to 425 meters, you can see clearly that this structure, as Plato described, has a natural opening in the south, so boats could go in and out.
Atlantis in the Sahara? Geologists debunk the theory. The ring-shaped mountains were caused by volcanic forces. They were not man-made.
There are a lot of supernatural theories out there, and you've got to locate them somewhere. Atlantis serves as a kind of blank screen onto which we can project these ideas, these stories of fallen civilizations, aliens, you name it.
Atlantis fuels people's imagination and ambition. If someone were to find Plato's city, they would be famous around the world. Dieter Bremer is captivated by a completely new theory. If you read Plato's original text correctly, he says you shouldn't look for Atlantis on Earth.
Well,
I would look for Atlantis where Plato said it was. One often wonders, what is the Atlantean Sea? It reminds me of the Titan Atlas, who carried the sky. So, following this logic, the Atlantean Sea could also be considered the Celestial Sea.
The former chemical engineer is looking for Atlantis from the perspective of technology. He believes that the Atlanteans were far more progressive than any other ancient civilization, literally supernatural.
Based on my findings, Atlantis was a concentric ring system in the sky, revolving around itself. This means it was a generational spacecraft, a mothership, a huge space station that was home to a civilization. And these people visited Earth, astronauts that were so technologically advanced that they must have seemed like gods to the Stone Age humans on Earth.
wie Götter gewirkt haben.
Atlantis, a circular space station in orbit? Bremer's hypothesis builds on the idea of ancient astronauts, which was made famous by writer Erich von Däniken. According to this theory, there were astronaut gods who gave knowledge and technology to humanity, namely in the form of crystal energy. Some believe that this also explains the Egyptian pyramids and hieroglyphs.
The theory involving ancient astronauts is popular among esoterics. This is where Atlantis fits in. These people claim that Atlantis, just like the pyramids or the Nazca lines, has been created by extraterrestrials because they simply cannot fathom that ancient people were able to create such advanced things.
Dieter Bremer thinks he's found evidence corroborating his theory in various ancient civilizations. Are they depicting space stations?
I can see elements of Atlantis in many concentric ring systems or systems consisting of a ring and a cross. You can find similar traditions everywhere in the world.
Atlantis in space? We likely won't find any artifacts out there. A critical interpretation of Plato's text could also be worthwhile. Is the author even trying to describe a real place? He's writing about a war between Atlantis and Athens.
Plato creates Atlantis as the arrogant, overconfident monarchy which threatens the survival of his ideal state, represented by ancient Athens. It's an allegory which contrasts the arrogance and overbearing state of the monarchy with the ideal nation-state, democracy, as described by Plato. In a way, Plato's asking us to think about our ideas about power and government.
That means Atlantis is only an allegory used to illustrate the victory of democracy over monarchy.
If the battles between Athens and Atlantis truly did take place, there would be more testimonies than just Plato's. Because unlike Troy and Delphi, Atlantis is not featured in any recorded history.
Could it be that Atlantis is just pure fiction? A tale from ancient Greece? Many researchers think Plato's descriptions are too realistic for that to be true. Richard Freund firmly believes in the existence of an ancient superpower destroyed by a natural catastrophe. He says a tsunami in Doñana National Park in southern Spain put an end to the capital's brilliant presence. According to his theory, the tsunami washed away the city. A picture taken from space reinforces his theory. Satellite images seem to show strange patterns. Do they point to Atlantis? Plato describes a harbor city with 3 circular basins, even providing exact measurements. Do they match the structures in the satellite images? Is the rectangular shape in the center the foundation of Poseidon's Atlantean temple? A local inspection in the mostly uninhabited Doñana National Park. At the very highest point, the Cerro del Trigo, Richard Freund describes how the search for Atlantis here in Spain became his mission in life.
Now, what's interesting about all the years we did this work is that it all started with this space photography from the 1980s. You could see rectangles, circles, straight lines, and all of these don't occur in nature. We need evidence of massive building inside the park. Then, together with the textual information, together with the photography, maybe we could say that this is the best location.
Excavations started in the middle of the park in 1920, but were never finished. Today, the area is protected. New excavations, impossible. The site looks just as archaeologists left it 100 years ago. Richard Freund and his son Ethan are looking for clues. A rock is sticking out of the ground. Or is it a piece of masonry, maybe dating back to the Bronze Age? It would be the first real piece of evidence Richard Freund can use to support his Atlantis theory. Will years of work finally pay off?
We're going to measure this edge, and then I want to just measure this edge. This is a right angle. There are no right angles in nature. This is something that was man-made.
5 meters long, almost a perfect right angle. Freund hopes to have found the outer walls of a large building.
So we have one clear section of the wall. What's very specific about this is this stone looks like it's been cut. It reflects human activity because it has right angles. Right angles only appear in human activity, not in nature.
A stone that looks like a wall. A single but valuable piece of evidence. Freund wants to believe it.
So you can see the same kinds of shells that we saw out on the beach. And they're embedded in this marl that's attached to the rock, which is not indigenous to this area. So this was all brought in, and you can see that it's all part of a massive rock that, with the marl on top, that was embedded in the earth right here.
Atlantis buried beneath the Spanish swamp. To Freund, this is more than a theory.
This is the last piece of the puzzle. You look at that and you say to yourself, what is it? Well, sometimes big things come in small packages. And this is a massive wall that is embedded in the sand. It's unlike anything else. And for all intents and purposes, there should be no major stone like that in this entire area. And yet it's there.
Spain or Santorini? Avi Nomiku is able to provide solid evidence of a big city on the island during antiquity, and that a volcanic explosion destroyed everything. Using a glove, she demonstrates how the explosion went down.
So imagine that this is the magmatic chamber of Santorini. It's full of magma, and it's beneath Santorini volcano. So what we are going to do, we will show how the Atlantis disappeared.
Hundreds of meters underneath the surface, the pressure inside the magma chamber continues to rise.
This is Atlantis, just at the top of the volcanic cone of the Pre-Kameni Island.
The eruption empties the chamber. It collapses and brings everything down with it.
There's a huge caldera, but Atlantis had been disappeared under the very many layers of sediments.
Is the ancient city on Santorini really Atlantis? The evidence is still too scant. Avi Nomiku and her colleague Othonas Vlasopoulos want to take a closer look at the mega crater. The volcano is largely immersed in the sea.
So this is a small robot. This is a small ROV. We call it as Jason. And we will explore the seafloor very close to near Kameni just to see the morphology of the lava that is cooling down on the seafloor.
8 engines and 3 cameras.
Lucano, I'm doing slowly.
The robot takes over for the divers and provides high-resolution images. Jason passes by lava solidified quite some time ago. The seafloor has been shaped by a powerful volcanic event.
The shape. Okay.
And at last, a discovery.
Oh, heavy. Come and see something.
Okay, wait. Need to be extra careful. Okay, so.
Have a look at this.
Wow, what are these?
It feels like steps, something like that.
Yeah, definitely, these are steps, but can you move towards to this side?
Yes.
Underwater stairs? Could they belong to a former harbor? To Efinomiku, these images are another step on the way to finding Atlantis. But they will need to conduct more dives to find out whether these steps are man-made or a product of nature.
I believe that there was a magic city just in the middle of the Caldera, and that city has been destroyed completely. But we need to search more and explore more. And when we find some evidence from the seafloor, not something that we will find on land, then I will be completely sure that Santorini was Atlantis.
Was Plato describing a real city and an actual catastrophe after all? Is there at least some truth to his story? If there is, there must be traces.
No culture, no civilization like the size of Atlantis could ever be totally destroyed. So we question what happened to the survivor.
Are the descendants of the Atlanteans still living among us? Will we ever find real proof?
One thing is certain, so advanced is modern historical research and modern archaeology that if it did exist, we'd definitely be able to find it. So we just need to keep looking and to keep digging.
Or does it turn out that Atlantis is nothing but a myth? A message from Plato warning us not to be too greedy and arrogant.
We are still fascinated by the myth of Atlantis because it's about the destruction of an advanced civilization. Today, we think we're at the peak of our civilization, but what Atlantis shows us is that even we are vulnerable. It's a terrifying story, but one that we are actually attracted to.
An allegory for a downfall, or an echo of a real civilization. Atlantis remains an unsolved mystery. Pharaohs, rulers of ancient Egypt, and one of them has long been forgotten. His tomb holds countless secrets. Tutankhamun.
The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb unleashed the curse.
After the tomb was opened, 17 people who are either directly or indirectly involved die. Has a deadly curse been placed upon this grave? What is behind these mysterious deaths?
We give curses such great power simply because we cannot control them.
Are all these incidents linked to something that happened more than 3,000 years ago? Does the mummy provide any clues?
Howard Carter cut off its entire head, damaging it in the process.
The curse of the pharaoh. Can this be backed up by science? The great myths of mankind. Mysteries passed on over thousands of years. Inexplicable events, places shrouded in legend, and superhuman heroes. Even scientists are fascinated. Is there any truth to these ancient legends? Researchers across the globe are working hard to solve the greatest mysteries of our time. Egypt, the oldest advanced civilization in history. Superpower of the ancient world. Powerful pharaohs ruled the country for over 3,000 years. feared by their enemies and worshipped as gods by their loyal subjects, all trying to expand their power while also solidifying their legacy for future generations. The key to making their mark on history: unique structures like temples, tombs, and the pyramids. Structures made to immortalize the pharaohs, shrouded in mystery to this very day. Thebes in southern Egypt, home to the Valley of the Kings. Unlike the famous pyramids, the tombs in this region remain hidden at first glance. The idea is to make it harder for tomb raiders to find the treasures. Ali Reda is Inspector of Antiquities of Upper Egypt. He knows everything about all the tombs and their stories.
What makes the Valley of the Kings special is that it's an arid region. Everything the ancient Egyptians placed in their tombs was able to stay intact and in good shape.
In 1922, the valley is the scene of a global sensation. Archaeologist Howard Carter conducts large excavation works. He wants to find treasures, gold, grave offerings, mummies. 10 years on, his financier, Lord Carnarvon, no longer believes that anything great will be found and signals his desire to cut off funding. Carter convinces him to give him one last chance. The explorer sets off on his last dig in the Valley of the Kings, and he's lucky. One of his workers comes across a secret opening with a stairway. On November the 4th, 1922, Carter sends a telegram to England. At last have made wonderful discovery in valley, stop. A magnificent tomb with seals intact, stop. Recovered same for your arrival, stop. Carter. 2 weeks later, Lord Carnarvon travels to the Valley of the Kings. It would be his last journey. On this occasion, the men find Tutankhamun's tomb by pure chance.
Other tombs were actually built over the top of Tutankhamun's tomb, and the rubble from that construction fell down in front of the entrance, which means that his grave was perfectly preserved and perfectly hidden until Carter came along and created a real Egyptian hype with his discovery.
Howard Carter breaks open the first door and lets Lord Carnarvon go first. The men have to clear the way leading down an 8-meter-long hallway.
The find was such a big sensation because the grave was untouched, and that was very rare indeed. Most Egyptian graves had long been robbed by grave robbers, but this one was absolutely perfect, and it created a wave of interest in all things Egyptian.
The news about the untouched tomb belonging to a pharaoh makes international headlines.
Egyptomania swept the globe in the 1920s. In particular, the nobility liked to collect Egyptian treasures and have Egyptian-themed parties where they would wear extravagant tunics and be fanned with palm fronds. And at the end of the party, they would unwrap a mummy.
Since the beginning of the 19th century, mummies were unwrapped for fun, and sometimes ground for their questionable medicinal properties. The Egyptian theme is picked up in theaters, literature, and cinemas. Howard Carter's spectacular find adds to the hysteria. Films often feature tombs, living mummies, explorers, and purported curses. In the Valley of the Kings, Carter uncovers hieroglyphs, revealing the name of the deceased. Pharaoh Tutankhamun. Up until then, he was just a completely anonymous Egyptian king. The objects Lord Carnarvon and Howard Carter find behind a stone wall exceed all expectations. Treasures, gold, furniture, grave offerings, all piled on top of each other in a seemingly careless heap. Pots full of food, chariots, god figurines. Carnarvon and Carter are looking at one of the greatest archaeological finds ever. But soon, inexplicable events start to unfold. With every piece they take out of the pharaoh's vault, the ire of the Golden King seems to grow. A first casualty sends shockwaves through the excavation team. Lord Carnarvon, the financier, dies. His son, the 6th Earl of Carnarvon, recalls the strange events of the night of his father's death.
All the lights went out in the hotel. I didn't know they'd all gone out all over Cairo, but they did, in point of fact. Every light went out.
Was the Lord sentenced to death because he entered the pharaoh's tomb first?
Some people thought he died of the curse, didn't they?
Well, I can tell you a great deal about that, as I was there at the time. He happened to be bitten by a mosquito. And what did he do? Cut the pimple off his face in the night or in the morning when he shaved. And he said at lunch, "I feel awful."
Supposedly, at the very hour of Carnarvon's death, his dog Susie dropped dead in faraway England.
After the death of Lord Carnarvon, the story of the pharaoh's curse really gained international momentum, also because of various other bizarre events associated with it, the death of his dog, and also the power cut at the time of his death. But at the time, power cuts really were very common in Cairo, and it did have nothing to do with his death.
Yet another sensation making global headlines. First, the discovery of the tomb. And now, the deadly curse of the pharaoh.
The curse gave the press a juicy story. It led to serious mystery, which excited not just the journalists, but their audiences. Now, if you want a story to be well known, make it a secret.
17 people die, allegedly from the curse of the pharaoh. Among the dead include X-ray expert Archibald Douglas Reed, Lord Carnarvon's half-brother Aubrey Herbert, Arthur Mace, Carter's right hand, Lady Almina, Carnarvon's wife, and Prince Ali Fahmy Bey, who claims to be a descendant of Tutankhamun. Is the tomb really the cause of all these deaths? Ali Reda, Inspector of Antiquities of Upper Egypt, enters KV-62. That's the official name of the legendary vault. The treasures have been removed from the tomb, but the original mummy of King Tutankhamun is on display. Does the ancient corpse have sinister powers that haunt us in the present?
The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb unleashed the curse. The facts surrounding the tomb are somewhat obscure. The young king was very mysterious. He took the throne when he was 8 or 9 years old and died at 18 or 19. A child, really.
Who was this mysterious pharaoh? Why do people live in fear of his curse to this day? Young Tutankhamun grew up in the royal palace. He was the son of Akhenaten, a revolutionary pharaoh. When Akhenaten ascended to the throne, he ordered all temples to be closed and banned the old gods. The people were only allowed to worship the sun. He and his spouse, the beautiful Nefertiti, were also to be treated like gods. After Akhenaten's death, his young son Tutankhamun succeeded him. 10 years later, he too died.
Tutankhamun completely disappeared from the history books after his death. So without finding his tomb, we'd probably still not know about this pharaoh to this very day.
This is what makes Carter's excavation so spectacular. His team uncovers almost 6,000 objects in the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, a king previously unknown to the modern world. Gold, furniture, everyday objects, all helping to expand our knowledge about the ancient Egyptians.
The Egyptians believed that life did not end with death. In fact, that a better life followed, which is why Egyptians were buried with everything that they could possibly need, with drinks, with food, with games, with furniture, even with servants.
The world is amazed by the splendor of the pharaoh's tomb. Carter empties the grave. Meanwhile, a growing number of people close to him die. Is the pharaoh taking revenge for the desecration of his grave? Excavations are still being carried out in the Valley of the Kings to this day. Just 200 meters away from Tutankhamun's tomb, a Dutch team is examining layers of rock. Egyptologist Carina van den Hoven is heading the mission. She and her team recently found this skull. Time and again, the rocks reveal human remains. Van den Hoven hopes to learn more about the tomb and those who are buried there. The mysterious deaths that occurred following Carter's excavation don't bother her.
People sometimes ask me about the curse of the pharaoh, and if those working with these human remains could be haunted by the curse. But I think the man buried here would be quite pleased if he knew what we were doing in this tomb.
Still, the alleged curse of the pharaoh continues to strike fear into the hearts of many.
We give curses such great power simply because we cannot control them. They can introduce such uncertainty and devastation into our lives that we cannot control, but we want to try and protect ourselves from that. In particular, the idea that someone can actually impact our lives in a negative sense from beyond the grave is disturbing.
Carter is unfazed by the headlines about the curse. He wants to get a hold of the last and greatest treasure, the pharaoh's mummy. And so he sets out to access the coffin's secret chamber, knocking down ancient walls in his path. At long last, he arrives. He finds himself in a small room with murals. Carter has reached his goal. The Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Objects of great value taken from Tutankhamun's tomb have found a new home here, including these large wooden shrines.
This shrine was located within the 3 other shrines behind a wall in the tomb. Inside, they found 4 sarcophagi placed one inside the other, just like the Russian Matryoshka dolls, where the dolls are placed one inside another. The same principle was applied here. 4 large rooms, one built into the next, home to those 4 sarcophagi. The last one contained the 4 coffins and was in the shrine back there. Come on, I'll show you. This shrine was inside this one, which was inside that one. And this last shrine is the largest. It contained all the others.
Attila, king of the Huns, is said to have been buried in 3 coffins, the outer one made of iron, the next made of silver, and the last one gold. Napoleon, whose Egyptian expedition paved the way that led to the deciphering of the hieroglyphs, is buried in 4 coffins.
Why 4 shrines and 4 coffins? According to ancient Egyptian teachings, 4 pillars held up the firmament. Burying the king between 4 pillars meant that his body would contain the 4 corners of the universe, over which he'd rule from the afterlife.
For Howard Carter, the days following the opening of the final chamber are agonizingly long. The wooden shrines need to be disassembled and removed from the site. Rumor has it that Carter's actions only serve to strengthen the curse's grip. Did ancient Egyptians really put a curse on their tombs? One trace leads us to the Egyptian Museum in Berlin. Here, thousands of texts bear witness to the mysterious knowledge of times long past. Egyptologist Verena Lepper is researching the curses from the time of the pharaohs.
Magic played a prominent role in ancient Egyptian religious tradition. They believed in higher beings, in a higher power, which is why they worshipped nature.
Magic and spells were an integral part of ancient Egyptian life. It was also popular to make predictions about the future. Many of the spells were meant to help their love lives. Others, however, were intended to hurt or kill their enemies.
This one is about punishing an unfaithful wife. They threw a wax crocodile into some water, and the crocodile came to life. It turned into a large real crocodile that snatched the adulterer as a punishment.
There's magic for every sphere of life and every budget. Professional magicians and priests offer it as a service. Even graves are cursed. Grave robbers beware. If they continue, they will die an agonizing death.
The ancient Egyptians would write spells on pottery or pieces of it. And then they destroyed them, threw them onto the ground, releasing the spell.
Did Howard Carter destroy such a piece of pottery when he entered the tomb, essentially pulling the trigger on the curse without ever realizing it? A pottery tablet engraved with the words, "Death shall come on swift wings to him that touched the tomb of the pharaoh," was reportedly found inside the tomb, but it has since disappeared, never to be found again. More than 3,300 years after the pharaoh died, Carter and his crew made their way to Tutankhamun's tomb. It was the beginning of a mysterious series of deaths. Why did they not listen to the warnings about the curse?
The tomb is surrounded by 4 patron goddesses. They are said to protect the coffin and the mummy of King Tutankhamun to this day.
All treasures have been retrieved from the grave and are now in museums and private collections across the world. Only the massive stone sarcophagus is still exactly where it was placed.
There was a general warning regarding all tombs in the Valley of Kings. All those who get near them will be punished.
To the pharaohs, tomb raiders presented the greatest threat to their eternal life in the afterworld. Is that why they cursed their graves? In the tomb of Ramses VI, the warning to the tomb robbers is very clear.
Decapitated people bound at their hands behind their back. That's a warning. Anyone who dare enter the king's burial chamber will have their head cut off and will be bound from behind. They will have to spend the rest of their lives that way.
We know that all of the finds were meticulously recorded and photographed, and there's no mention of it in Howard Carter's notes. However, there's every chance it was actually not spoken of for fear of arousing superstition from the local workers. And also, Carter was rumoured that he was embezzling finds, so perhaps he made that tablet disappear.
An ancient curse causing deaths in the 20th century? For decades, this mystery keeps scientists on their toes, until one day, disturbing reports from Krakow, Poland, make headlines. Events that bear striking resemblance to series of deaths in the Valley of the Kings. On Friday, the 13th of April, 1973, researchers opened the grave of King Casimir IV. Shortly thereafter, 5 of them die. Whispers about the curse of the king are quick to circulate. Wisław Barabasz was there in Krakow when the tomb was opened. The former microbiology professor, who was then a young research assistant, was allowed to assist in the exhumation of the king.
5 people died within 2 years. That's when the case took a really fascinating turn. People suddenly remembered all the warnings about opening tombs and letting the kings rest in peace.
Głosy, które mówiły, żeby nie otwierać żadnych grobów, zostawmy królów w spokoju.
Casimir IV ruled over Poland for 45 years in the 15th century. The economy and the culture of the country flourished. It was a golden era. To this day, Casimir is highly respected in Poland. But that's not why the opening of his tomb makes headlines. 10 of the workers and researchers involved die within years. A parallel to the curse of the pharaoh? They die of heart attacks, strokes, and pneumonia. Could these causes all be linked to the grave that they opened in Krakow? Casimir's burial chamber had been sealed for centuries, just like the pharaoh's tomb, and with equally dangerous consequences.
We grew the different bacteria and fungi in petri dishes. And then we saw it. Aspergillus flavus fungus. It turns out it's one of the most dangerous and toxic fungi.
If the spores of the toxic mycelium are inhaled, secretions and blood cells from the blood vessels enter the alveoli, leaving behind protein deposits. As a result, the oxygen intake capacity of the lungs is reduced. This can be life-threatening, especially for people with pre-existing conditions. The researchers in Krakow didn't wear protective masks inside the centuries-old tomb, which, unlike the Valley of the Kings, was quite humid. The perfect environment for the Aspergillus flavus fungus. Its spores kill the scientists. But could the highly toxic fungus also be behind the so-called curse of the pharaoh? Lord Carnarvon was the first to enter the recently opened tomb of the pharaoh and the first one who died. Protective gear like masks or gloves? None. To make matters worse, Carnarvon also suffered from lung problems. Eventually, researchers give the all clear. The Aspergillus mycelium cannot thrive in the dry Egyptian air. The Krakow lead is a dead end. The curse of the pharaoh remains a mystery. The Zurich Institute of Evolutionary Medicine. Professor Rulli knows mummies have to be handled with much care. He's examined Tutankhamun various times. He's not too fond of Howard Carter.
When Howard Carter and his team discovered the grave in 1922 and examined the mummy in 1925, his team had little to no background in medicine. Evidently, the main focus was on the artifacts, and you can tell. They didn't handle the mummy the way we would today, from a medical perspective. I'm not judging. It was a different time, a different question, a different approach.
What did Howard Carter do to the mummy to get his hands on the gold? For days, his team was trying to open the huge stone sarcophagus. Inside, they found coffin after coffin after coffin, all tightly placed one in the other, with barely an inch of wiggle room. Carter needed to build special tools so they wouldn't destroy the wooden coffins or the intarsia. Eventually, they discovered the golden mask. Howard Carter is overwhelmed by what he's found and wants to present the golden mask as soon as possible. He desperately tries to lift the mummy from the sarcophagus, but due to the resin used to embalm the mummy, it sticks to the coffin. Carter ends up putting the wooden coffin in the blistering heat of the sun for 2 days. He hopes the resin will soften so he can finally be able to see the pharaoh's face.
Howard Carter cut off its entire head, damaging it in the process.
Howard Carter disassembles the mummy into individual parts. He thinks this is the best way to display the treasures. Only later does Carter realize that he has gone too far.
Some of the parts that were severed have been put back together, so the damage is only visible to a certain extent. They wanted to make it look like they left the body more or less intact to future generations.
Professor Rulli has not only examined Tutankhamun, but also Ötzi, the most famous and oldest natural mummy in the world. The Iceman was found in 1991 by mountaineers in an alpine glacier. His body has been mummified over thousands of years by the frigid temperatures and is amazingly well preserved. But once again, some of those involved in the excavation of Ötzi died within years. The case was soon labeled Ötzi's curse. And maybe the way the mummy was handled was the reason behind it once again. Like Tutankhamun, people touched and examined the mummy with their bare hands. The only difference, gold and treasures don't play a role in Ötzi's case. Researchers are only after the insights the mummy can provide. To better control these factors in the future, the Swiss researcher wants to examine mummies directly on site. Together with his colleague Patrick Eppenberger, Professor Rulli is currently working on a 3,000-year-old foot. It is crucial that their DNA not be mixed with the mummies. It can't be touched without gloves.
The special thing about this technique is that we have the option of using 3D imaging. We obtain an image that isn't like X-ray, but rather a CT, allowing us to view the object in 3D form.
Modern technology could have saved Tutankhamun's mummy a lot of trouble. But after more than 3,300 years, and despite state-of-the-art research methods, the mummy of the pharaoh still keeps its secret.
This machine is still a prototype. We developed it ourselves. It can be taken apart completely, and it actually fits into 2 small boxes, so it can be transported on an airplane. It allows us to examine the individual layers of a mummy's body parts very well.
Ötzi's cause of death is clear. It also reveals a lot of information about the life of Europe's most famous mummy.
From a medical perspective, we always try to make diagnoses when examining ancient Egyptian mummies. The same applies to mummies like Ötzi. We want to see if things have changed as a result of the different lifestyle we live today, or because of other pathogens. We are always trying to learn something about this dynamics and how we interact with our environment. Every mummy can contribute to this quest.
While Ötzi was murdered, the researchers and alpinists who died after his find were not cursed, but rather died of old age, had a lifestyle prone to risk, or pre-existing conditions.
We really want to understand this new knowledge that excavating the tomb can give us, but in our minds, even possibly unconsciously, we know that it is wrong to disturb the dead, to not respect them. And because of this, we're undergoing this ethical dilemma, which results in a curse.
Thus, the key to the Tutankhamun case does not lie in parallels to other famous cases. But what makes the pharaoh so unique? Does his short life hold any clues? Why did the Egyptian king die? Was he killed? X-rays from 1969 show splintered bones on the mummy's skull. Again, some are quick to bring up the curse of the pharaoh. The Valley of the Kings, 2005. Zahi Hawass was chief Egyptologist at the time and wanted to examine the pharaoh on site using state-of-the-art technology. The scientists don't believe in a curse and simply want to retrieve information from the mummy.
Today, a team of Egyptian archaeologists and technicians examined the mummy for the first time by CT scanning. And the purpose of this examination is really to look inside King Tut to find out the cause of his death.
Once more, the Golden King is not left to rest in peace. And once more, strange things start to happen. While examining the mummy, the technological equipment goes haywire. The computer starts malfunctioning. But eventually the scan works, and the researchers receive 1,700 images of the mummy. The verdict: Tutankhamun wasn't killed. But still, there's something odd about the mummy.
The most puzzling thing about Tutankhamun's body is that it appears burned. Now, that's a very strange thing to do to a body if you want it to last for centuries, but perhaps it was the natural result of the embalming process that the body went through.
In ancient Egypt, pharaohs were embalmed before the funeral in an elaborate process lasting up to 70 days. This was meant to make sure the soul would recognize the body in the other world. The body was thoroughly cleansed. The inner organs and the brain were removed. The body was covered in sodium bicarbonate, dehydrating it completely to prevent decomposition. Back in Zurich, at the Institute for Evolutionary Medicine, Professor Rulli is using animal organs to conduct research on historical mummification techniques.
The mummification process in ancient Egypt likely lasted several weeks. It's hard to reconstruct because we've only got limited knowledge about how the Egyptians carried out this sacred process. We are trying to simulate the process using substances similar to those available in Egypt at the time. We are using fresh pig organs from the slaughterhouse. We used them to reconstruct the different steps of the mummification process.
The art of mummification was only passed on orally, from father to son or from master to apprentice. Professor Rulli can only guess the exact details, but the researcher has an explanation as to why Tutankhamun's mummy is dark-colored.
Die Mumie von Tutanchamun erscheint relativ dunkel.
Tutankhamun's mummy is quite dark, black-tinted. Some think that the mummy also looks burnt, but I am rather skeptical about that. I think it has more to do with the fact that the embalming fluids had properties that caused the skin to change color.
Similar to the embalmed pig's liver that has almost turned black.
We are looking at a pig's liver which has already changed after several weeks. We first tried it in sodium bicarbonate, treated it in oils and beeswax, and at the end, we covered it with bitumen, the star-like substance. The liver has flattened, it's become thin, but it's got the typical look and texture of mummified organs that one could also find in an ancient Egyptian mummy.
At the end of the procedure, the mummified heart is placed back into the body. Usually. But Tutankhamun's heart is missing from his mummy. Why? Without a heart, the Egyptians believe a pharaoh cannot live on in the afterlife. Eternal life after death plays a pivotal role for ancient Egyptians. The soul has to live on, but certain steps need to be taken. And this is where magic comes into play once again, because the dead pharaoh has to face the judgment of the deceased.
In this scene of the Book of the Dead, the principles of justice and truth are weighed against the heart, the person's life achievements, so to speak. You can see the hieroglyph for the heart here. And this one is Ma'at, justice, truth. If they are unbalanced, the person is allowed to pass into the afterlife for eternity.
The heart mustn't lie.
The monster is this primordial creature, which will devour the deceased if the trial doesn't end with a ruling in their favor.
Is the heartless mummy cursed? Or did the sudden death, fast mummification, and hasty funeral lead to some embalming errors? It remains unclear when Tutankhamun's heart was lost. Based on their research, scientists agree that Tutankhamun died when he was 19, and apparently wasn't killed. So what did kill the pharaoh?
There are various theories saying he was run over by a chariot and got injured in the process. Based on current findings, however, I believe most of these injuries are unfortunately the result of handling that took place in the 1920s, but we are unable to prove that.
Many of the deaths in Carter's team are just as mysterious as the pharaoh's fate. Carter's assistant, Arthur Mace, dies at 53 for some inexplicable reason. Unlike Howard Carter, he's said to have believed in the curse of the pharaoh and even feared it. Can curses really bring about bad luck? At least to those who believe in them. Gurus Holst claims to be a magician. He is convinced about the power that thoughts have over the purely physical world. Holst wants to demonstrate this in an experiment.
A curse can also have a long-lasting effect if you design it that way. You also have to keep in mind that curses aren't just for the living, they also exist in the spiritual world where time ceases to exist as we know it. Personally, I would assume a curse could still be in place after 1,000 years, if that was how it was intended to be.
Gurus Holst sets the scene for a curse. He asks invisible forces for assistance. Forces that exist only for those who believe in them.
I myself worship demons and underworld gods. They allow me to access my powers.
The magician wants to place a curse on the arrows of the archers. The aim of the experiment is to make the cursed arrows less accurate. Our three archers don't know what's coming. They are simply told to prepare and warm up as they would for a competition. While the magician's task is to curse the arrows to affect the archer's accuracy.
I will once again center the arrows using my energy, so they don't hit the target.
Magician Gurus Holst tries to cast a spell on the arrows in order to alter the accuracy of our shooters. Nicole Engel is a psychologist and behavioral therapist. She is monitoring the experiment and gets a first impression of the participants' mental strength. does the archer's psyche factor in once they learn about the cursed arrows?
At this distance, hitting the target with this equipment shouldn't be an issue.
It's going to be fun.
First, the participants shoot 3 regular arrows. This way can be determined how well the archers perform without pressure or competition stress.
If I have seen that a curse or magic has worked for someone, whether it's really true or not, it might be more likely that I'm experiencing a nocebo effect, meaning I believe that a curse or cursed arrows could negatively affect my performance.
Marek has a harder time than the others, even with arrows that haven't been cursed. Next, we start our experiment with the cursed arrows. The archers have only been informed that the arrows have been manipulated, and nothing more.
There you go. There you go.
Is there a noticeable difference?
I tried to see if they're heavier, and I checked the stiffness, but I don't notice any differences.
Does the alleged curse affect the accuracy of the archers? Does it really have an effect on the arrows? Or rather, on the confidence of the archers? Olympian athlete Alexander has full control over the cursed arrows. His performance is unaltered. He shoots accurately, as always.
It's a bit worse, but I would expect it to be in the range of variance that is typical for my shooting.
I had as many hits as in the first round. Of course, in my mind, I was like, what has changed? I don't know.
While Camillo thinks he feels something, but still hits the target, Marek struggles more.
I didn't notice anything unusual or different about the arrows, so it was definitely more of a mental challenge for me. I noticed I got nervous. That affected my technique a bit.
Mindset or real magic? Did the curse work?
Two of the participants are able to control their mindsets rather well. One of the pros, the one who's also been to the Olympic Games, said, "Of course I thought about it." But still, he managed to continue to shoot well. The other participant wasn't able to do that because he let it get into his head. Thoughts, feelings, and our physiology or physical reactions are always connected. If I can't get my thoughts under control, things don't seem to work the way they usually do.
This is known as the Nocebo effect. Suggestion can affect our mind and body.
The nocebo effect is the bad big brother of the placebo effect. So where the placebo effect works by suggesting in your brain that there are positive outcomes to a particular sham treatment, and therefore you feel positive effects in your body or in your mind, the nocebo effect does the exact opposite. So by believing that you're going to have a negative outcome, that manifests itself in you.
Subconscious processes in our brain. The power of imagination.
It was a test, but I think I had some influence on the outcome. And please remember, I didn't want to harm them. If I had crammed in more, if I had placed a real curse on these arrows, it could have swept the guys off their feet, and it would have been irresponsible to send them out there. I only cursed the arrows, nothing more.
The effect is different for each archer. Those who believe in curses can feel the nocebo effect. To scientists, there is only facts. Also when it comes to the pharaoh. DNA analysis and other examinations have shown the beautiful golden mask hides a deformed face, marked by disease. Tutankhamun's body shows clear signs of incest. The young pharaoh was probably ill from birth. He had a club foot. This explains why there were about 130 canes in his tomb. He also had an acute case of malaria. His premature death might have been the result of disease, incest, and a potential accident. No murder took place. But what was behind all those deaths in Poland and after Ötz's discovery, or in the Valley of the Kings? It was no fungus, and it was no curse. These were explicable natural causes of death. Most of the deceased were old and had pre-existing conditions. But again, the power of suggestion plays a role. It was only after journalists linked the cases that the myth of the curse of the pharaoh emerged. The pharaoh died unexpectedly, so his funeral in the Valley of the Kings had to be organized in haste. The tomb required for his burial hadn't been made yet. So the young king had to make do with a tomb that didn't reflect his status. Usually, pharaohs had their tombs built while they were still alive. Today, science has shown that Egyptian graves were often used more than once. Dr. Carina van den Hoven and her team are currently looking into this topic in the Valley of the Kings.
This tomb was built for its owner in 1400 BC. His name was Djehuti, and he's depicted here alongside his mother. A couple of hundred years later, the tomb was used by another family member, who we can also see here.
Scientists will continue conducting research on this grave for many years. Whether their takeaways can be transferred to the young pharaoh Tutankhamun is impossible to tell. Even more so since scientists also have to go back and correct previous hypotheses.
We previously thought they reused the tombs out of convenience, for economic reasons, because it was cheaper to use someone else's tomb. But that's not true. Our research has shown the act of reusing a tomb meant so much more. The two deceased people had a lot in common. They were both called Djehuti. They had the same profession, managing the Karnak temple. That indicates that the tomb wasn't reused for practical purposes, but rather for deeper reasons. People were actually trying to reconnect with the past.
Tutankhamun was a modest pharaoh.
Tutankhamun's story is so fascinating to us for several reasons. Partly because he was such an incredibly young king who died at a very young age, but also because we are fascinated by Egyptian life, by this amazing civilization that existed thousands of years ago and has practically disappeared into the dust. We love to hear these magical stories of kings and their adventures, and associate that with the curse, and you have an amazing story to hand down the generations.
Tutankhamun's death marks the end of the 18th dynasty of pharaohs. New dynasties take over. The curse of the pharaoh remains a myth, a media phenomenon, a story that many just want to believe in. And yet, many mysteries about Tutankhamun himself remain. About his missing heart, or whether his unusual tomb can also be explained by the theory that he, like his father Akhenaten, was to be erased from the history of the pharaonic empire.